let's drop down an RS light dome. So we have a light. Under the shader tab, we'll input our map, source images, HDRIs, 4K version. We'll leave the orientation as is. We'll turn the exposure up to 1.25 for now. And I think we can go to the light tab and turn that off in the viewport so we can't see it. Next up, let's create a ROP network, which is where our ROPs will live. Inside here, we'll create a Redshift custom ROP. Drop that down. You can rename this, I guess, to something like Bottle for now. That's fine. Let's change the camera to render cam. Jump out. Let's go to the Redshift tab, open the render view. And right now, we're currently in the sRGB color space, which we don't want to be working in. So we'll change this to OCIO, load in our ACES config file. If you haven't saved a preset already, you can load in the config file, just browse for it wherever you put that folder on your hard drive. Mine is in here. And make sure the view transform is set to sRGB ACES. And if this step confuses you, I have a course called Mastering ACES Color Space, so I'd seriously recommend checking that out. Okay, so with that said, let's hit render once again. Cool. Okay, so let's set up our materials. So I'll create a material network, which is where our materials will live. We'll rename this to materials. We'll jump inside. I'll create an RS material, which is just a standard Redshift material. Rename this to glass bottle. Really cool thing with Redshift materials, it has presets. So from here I'll choose tinted glass. Just before we set up that material, I'll turn off all the other assets. We'll jump back into the material network. And from here we can apply, there's a few ways we can apply materials to an object. You can drag the material onto the object, which works fine for the bottle, but that's going to be a little bit more difficult to do for the liquid, as the liquid is inside the bottle. The other way is to go to the render tab on the geometry node and change the material here by clicking this box. So you can see there we're in the object context, then in the materials, which you can see here, and then the glass bottle. And I always export relative path for that. So that basically means if I change the name of the bottle to something like this, for example, then that shows up there. And that was definitely a coincidence that I just typed haha over it over and over again. Okay. Okay, so we've applied our bottle material. Let's hit render. That gives us this, which is looking okay. Jump in and let's start playing around with this a little bit more. We'll change the BRDF to GGX. We'll leave the index of refraction at 1.51. We'll increase the absorption scale up to 11. That just makes it a little bit more tinted. And we'll change the transmittance color to something like a sort of greenish kind of color, I think. Something around that. Yeah, let's make that a little bit more subtle. I'm just doing this so it's looking a little bit more, more natural. I don't push it too far. I just remember that whenever I'm doing this, I'm always using reference images. And at this stage, I'm just going around the object. I'm looking around and just seeing if there's any issues or artifacts that are standing out to me. And this is why we've exported the models first without UVing them to test them in Houdini. And then once we've tested them in Houdini, you can go back to Maya and you can UV. Okay, so that's looking cool. Let's add the liquid in now. So let's hit render. And you notice this is happening, which is bad. So what we need to do is we need to decrease the liquid by a very small amount. And like I was saying earlier, that render engines don't like it when two surfaces are in contact with each other, so there needs to be a really, really tiny distance between them. So just make sure you've paused the render when you're doing this, otherwise it might crash. So I'll click on the transform. Let's come out of the camera. I think what I'll do is add another transform SOP right underneath there, so we keep it nice and straightforward. I'll view from this transform. We'll solo this object on its own, so we'll say hide other objects, just so we're seeing the liquid on its own. If I hit enter in on the keyboard, that'll bring up the handle. And we need to move the pivot to the center. So like in Maya, you'd go to modify center pivot. There's a few ways you can do this, but this is my preferred method. If we go to the pivot transform here, under the pivot translate, we can move the pivot by typing in $CEX, $CEY, and $CEZ. So that's one way of doing it. So once we've done this, we can then scale to something like 0.998, which decrease the size of it by a very small amount. Make sure we're viewing from the facet. And let's hit render. See what that's looking like. And you can see there we've got a tiny bit of artifacting. So we need to decrease that liquid just a little bit more. Something like 0.996 until it starts to disappear. Something around that, I think. It's fine. Yeah, I think settling around something like 0.994 is fine for that. Okay, so let's set up our material for the liquid. Just going to pause the render, create an RS material. Let's rename this to liquid. On that liquid, we'll change this to water as a base to work from. Change the BRDF to GGX. And before we start messing around with it, I think we'll apply it. So on the liquid, render tab, .. which is the current directory. So that just means current directory, .. And we can choose materials and then liquid. Or you can use this box here to search for it. Let's hit play. I'll select my render cam as well to make sure that's selected. So that's the water in there now, or the liquid. And now we just want to introduce some more absorption scale to make this more like soda. So we'll jump into the material network. We will increase the absorption scale up to something like 25. And I'll change the transmittance color to sort of like a really sort of deep orangey reddy color, which kind of looks like that. I think that's not looking too bad. Maybe shift it up just a touch more into the red, like there. We'll drop that down so it's a little bit darker, I think, just so it's not as prominent. Even bring back a little bit of orange, like that. I think we'll drop the refraction weight, so just basically means less light will pass through the object. Yeah, I think something like that is fine. And let's add a little bit of roughness, 0.01, as nothing is perfectly glossy. Okay, I think those settings are working nicely for now. That's fine. Let's pause the render. I think next up we'll create the soda material, which is super simple. So scale that down just a little bit more. Jump into the material network. create another RS material. Rename this to text. Let's drop this material onto the, if we can see it. Looks like the HDRI is getting in the way, so we'll turn this icon scale down to 0, as we don't need to see it. Go back into the materials, reapply that material to the soda text. In here, we'll set this to something like plastic. We'll change the roughness to about, I think, about 0.3, I think is fine. BRDF to GGX. I think the rest can be left the same. We'll also put the color up to 100% diffuse. Make sure you've got the text turned on, and we'll hit render. Which looks like that, so that's looking pretty cool. Next up, we will very quickly assign a simple shader to the cap. But first we need to really UV the cap in Maya before we start doing texturing on this. So let's assign another RS material. Let's call that cap. Custom. Let's choose something like, yeah, let's choose something like gold for now. Turn the cap on. Apply the cap material to the cap. Hit render. It's looking way too gold. We'll change the reflectivity down to something like, something a bit more subtle. Like that. We'll lift up the roughness to about 0.25, I think. I think that's an alright base. I mean, it's not looking great, but I think that's fine for now to demonstrate a basic setup. And we'll refine that later on.